folks, my name is Rob. Welcome back to another F1 Fantasy video. Today we're looking at my 2024 season predictions. So if you're new around here, you're enjoying the content, and you're looking forward to more of this kind of content heading into the new season, please do like the video and subscribe to the channel because there's going to be plenty more of it as we approach Bahrain 2024. So we'll get the easy ones out of the way first. And for me, the Drivers' Championship goes to Max Verstappen in 2024. I think it's a foregone conclusion, more or less. Max is gunning for his fourth title in a row to match Seb Vettel's record of 4 in a row with Red Bull in the early 2010s. I think that's a lot of extra motivation for him to push for his fourth in a row. Christian Horner, Adrian Newey, GP, Hannah Schmitz, the list goes on. He's got the team around him to continue to build on the great results we've come to know and expect from him. And in a car that I fully expect is going to still be the best on the grid, he's pretty much a sure thing for me in his books. I think we'll see challenges at various points in the season from Charles Leclerc, Lewis Hamilton, Lando Norris. But I think Max is in the form of his career. He's entering his peak, his prime, if he's not already there. So I definitely think this season is his to lose. And as a result of that, as we saw last season, carried Red Bull to the Constructors' Championship, obviously with Perez's shortcomings at various points. I fully expect that's going to be the case again this season. Yes, Perez had his moments. He had 2 wins at Baku and Saudi Arabia, which seemed like such a long time ago. And I would love to see him get back on the top step this season, but I just don't know if he's got it in him. He's a year older. The errors, the inconsistencies that plagued him last season probably still weigh on his mind a little bit. So I do wonder if he's going to do much of the heavy lifting for Red Bull this season. Max, I think, in just about any team setup will pretty much push that team to the Constructors' Championship. So I fully expect that's going to occur this season. The top 3 for the season, I've got Max, Lewis, and Lando, or Lando and Lewis, I mean to say, but I think P2 and P3 for me could certainly be interchanged. The reason I've got Lando currently at P2 is because of the fact that they made such great strides in car performance last season. The McLaren from the halfway point just about certainly was the team closest to Red Bull and matched Max, or got close to matching Max for the most part as well. Lewis obviously had his moments, his flashes of brilliance. He had 6 podiums in 2023, and I fully expect that number's going to increase in 2024. Mercedes look like the W15 is going to be very different to what the W14 looked like. They're going to scale it back, start from scratch, introduce a number of new features and components that hopefully propel Lewis to the front of the field and rival Max for that championship push. So, I think both of these drivers, Lando and Lewis, are going to be challenging Max, but I still think the class of the Red Bull driver is going to push him beyond them into this season. This is where things get a bit more interesting. And for me, I've got Alex Albon as my most improved driver. Now, Alex had a breakout season last year with Williams, scored 26 of their 27 points, carried them all the way to P7 in the Constructors. And you might say, he almost looked like the most improved driver last season. Why would you have him again this season? I think Albon has still so much more to go. He's got a contract year coming up for him. Ferrari have potentially considered him as a driver that they could bring in place of Sainz, who does have one eye on other seats in the paddock. And I think as well, Alex wants to continue to prove to everyone that he deserves to be back at a top team like he was at Red Bull, deserves to win week in, week out, compete for podiums and points week in, week out. And I think when you've got teams like Ferrari, for instance, that are going to put someone like Alex on their shopping list, he's going to want to make it very clear to him, to them, and to the rest of the competition that he is a force to be reckoned with. And I think he's going to continue to make those great strides again this season with Williams. James Vowles has been an absolute masterstroke for them. And I fully expect that that team is going to do everything they can to push Alex Albon to that next level. Hopefully crack a top 10 in the Drivers' Championship, but we'll have to wait and see. Really interested to see what kind of car they come out with in preseason testing. For the constructor, for me, that goes to Racing Bulls. I think there's a number of reasons to be optimistic for them, and I'm particularly a big proponent of these guys heading into the new year. First of all, the RB19, it's expected they're going to take a number of components from that RB19, arguably the most dominant car in F1 history, and incorporate that into their car setup this year. You also add the fact that Ricciardo will have a full season under his belt with Racing Bulls. Yuki Tsunoda's entering a contract year as well, and he's, along with Ricciardo, got one eye on that second Red Bull seat. I know he perhaps hasn't been linked quite as closely as Ricciardo might have, but there's still, I think, a point to prove for Yuki, considering he had a number of very good results last season, a number of P10s, particularly in the first half of the season where AlphaTauri was considered arguably one of the worst cars on the grid. They made great improvements to that in the second half of the year, and I think Yuki, with another year of experience under his belt, will want to be showing everyone what he's truly capable of. You've got Ricciardo as well, another experienced driver. We all know what he can do on his day, and I think that Red Bull, he's responded to quite well in the past driving with the RB19, which he drove at the Pirelli tyre test last season and impressed Christian Horner. I fully expect that's going to be another reason to push them up, and I think they should have P6, maybe even P5 as their goal for this year, given how much optimism there is around that RB19. So look at that Racing Bulls outfit as a force to be reckoned with at the front of the midfield. My biggest disappointment for 2024 is going to be Kevin Magnussen. Now, Haas are in a state of flux right now. Gunther Steiner has been pushed out the door. Ayu Komatsu has come in trying to steady the ship, but it's very clear that their car is well behind development. Komatsu expects Haas to be the slowest car at Bahrain, and Gene Haas demands all of these results in a team where their budget just isn't going to be able to match the rest of the field. I do worry that K-Mag, who was a non-factor for most of last season and was comprehensively outperformed by Hülkenberg, if he has a place on the grid next year, is still yet to be seen. His contract is up. Hülkenberg's contract is up, and you've got drivers like Ollie Behrman waiting in the wings who drove a number of practice sessions last year for Haas. They may look to blood a younger driver in 2025. So unless K-Mag can not only outperform his teammate, but also other drivers in the midfield, I do worry that he would not only be the biggest disappointment on the grid, but a driver where his seat is very much at risk heading into the new season in 2025. My biggest disappointment for constructors is Alpine. It seems maybe a little pessimistic, but I have cause for concern for Alpine, primarily because Otmar left midway through last season. That 5-year plan he spoke about to bring them to the front of the field and challenge for the championship and race wins seems like a distant memory now. And even though Gasly and Ocon are proven commodities, Ocon that podium in Monaco last year, Gasly a number of very good results as well, they seem to be the only two steady parts of that sinking ship that Alpine is. They are regressing a little bit. The race pace of that car last season did not look encouraging, and I have their floor as low as P8 in the Constructors' Championship. So I do worry that unless this car in preseason looks encouraging, they could be really scrapping to just get points on the board. They are, as I said, two very good drivers, Ocon and Gasly, but I think there's obviously more to be said about the car, the overall consistency or stability of that outfit, and whether or not they're able to match it up with Aston Martin, Racing Bulls, Williams, all teams that have taken various steps forward in the last year or so to make improvements to their car, their lineup, their facilities. So I think Alpine should be worried, and I do expect they'll probably hover somewhere between P6 and P8, but to where that exactly is, we'll have to wait and see. Most overtakes for me in 2024 goes to Pierre Gasly. The next couple of points are more fantasy-related metrics. But I've got Gasly as my driver for most overtakes. Historically, we see the drivers that do make the overtakes are those that are experienced drivers in midfield teams, typically qualify in Q2, the odd Q3, sometimes Q1 appearances, and just have better racecraft and experience than some of their compatriots in the midfield to make those passes. Gasly's been on the grid for a number of years now. He's been through the system at Red Bull, AlphaTauri, now at Alpine, in a car that is definitely a midfield car. Where he qualifies will largely dictate how many overtakes he makes. Gasly had 5 overtakes per race last season. The only drivers in front of him, Stroll, Zhou, Piastri, Tsunoda and Perez. I'd exclude Piastri and Perez from that mix only because they're now in cars, or they are in cars, that are going to challenge for the title. So I would exclude them. You look at the other drivers I mentioned, I think Gasly is the best driver of that bunch, in my opinion. Tsunoda perhaps could rival him. But you're looking at a midfield team or a midfield car with a good driver in that seat. Overtakes for me, for Pierre Gasly, are going to be very much on his menu heading into this season. For positions gained, I've got Lance Stroll. Now, Stroll at Aston Martin last year underwhelmed for the most part. He was in a car that was expected to challenge very early on. Didn't have a single podium though, and it was pretty much downhill after that P5 in the first race of the season. So even though I'm not quite sure what to expect from Aston Martin, they do have a car that really could surprise us. But Lance Stroll is a driver that doesn't always surprise us. If anything, he hardly ever surprises us. He's out in Q1 more than he'd probably like. And if you're looking at a midfield car like the Aston Martin, if he's out in Q1, he's going to make passes. He's going to move up the grid more often than not with those DNFs from drivers ahead of him. He had the second most positions gained of all drivers in 2023 with 2.6 per race. The only driver that bested him was Perez, again because of the fact Perez qualified so poorly. So Stroll for me is probably my pick for the most positions gained this season. I do think that he is someone that just isn't quite knocking on the door for points finishes every week, but will ordinarily pick up a few positions from his qualifying position, purely because of the fact that there are going to be a natural rate of attrition in every single race. So one eye on Stroll for my positions gained leader this season. I've got a couple of driver predictions here. Some may be more far-fetched than others, but Perez, I think, will retire in 2024. He's got Ricciardo and Tsunoda breathing down his neck. They both have an eye on that second seat in Red Bull in 2025, and I certainly think Perez has perhaps not done enough, even though he had a couple of race wins last season, to warrant a seat at the Red Bull garage the following year. So I think, Ricciardo has been brought into the Racing Bulls fold for a reason. I fully expect he should be the favorite to replace Perez in 2025. And I think if it gets to a point where Perez, the pressure is too much for him, he's got that young family he wants to look after, he may just wave that white flag, call time on his career. It could be mid-season, it could be end of the season. We just don't know with him at the moment. But I definitely think there aren't really many landing spots for him if we look outside of Red Bull at other top teams. It would probably be, say, a Williams, a Sauber. There really just aren't many spots for him at all. So I think he'll likely call time unless we do see a surprise move or two in the driver market. Albon to Ferrari, as I mentioned before, an excellent driver, one who's proven to us in the last couple of years that he deserves to be back at a team that is going to compete week in, week out. Sainz perhaps has one eye on Audi in a couple of years' time. So I think if he decides to move early, Albon becomes a very natural fit for that Ferrari outfit. I'd love to see him in that red race suit. I think that would suit him immensely. So, I think that's a very likely possibility. And then I've got 3 new reserve or F2 drivers come into F1 in 2025. I mentioned Ollie Behrman at Haas becomes a likely candidate to replace Kevin Magnussen. Théo Pourchaire in the Alfa Romeo Sauber garage, I think will be putting the pressure on Joe and Bottas, both of which don't have guaranteed seats beyond this season. And then we've got Liam Lawson, who I think will be a natural fit to come in to the Racing Bulls setup to replace Ricciardo, hypothetically, if he was to move to Red Bull to replace Perez. So a bit of a merry-go-round of drivers, but I certainly think there are going to be a few new faces and quite a bit of movement as we approach silly season heading into the summer break. And my one bold prediction for the season is that Piastri wins before Lando Norris. We've got the Chinese Grand Prix coming up in race week 5. And I know this is a bit of a cop-out answer, but Piastri looked very good in the sprint races. The Chinese Grand Prix is a sprint race weekend, and Piastri historically, or at least last season, didn't manage his tyres quite as well as Lando Norris. And in sprint races, that's less of a concern. So I think Piastri could win a sprint race, much like he did in Qatar last season. Hopefully he wins a Grand Prix. As a fellow Australian, I'd love to see him get that maiden Grand Prix. So if that eventuates, wonderful. But I still think Piastri could be coming out of the blocks pretty early and pretty soon and put the pressure on Norris with a sprint race weekend in race week 5. So that's it for now, guys. I'll leave it all there, and I do expect to be back with another video on my P1 to P20 predictions of all drivers on the grid this season. So if you liked what you saw today, if you want to see more of this and you want to be up to date on all the latest F1 and F1 fantasy news, please do like and subscribe to the channel because it helps me and it means a great deal to me as we kick off the new season. So thanks very much for watching, guys, and I'll see you all very soon.